The sound of $15,000 worth of custom Italian silk tearing apart is something you never forget. It sounded like a scream. When my daughter-in-law tried to stand up for her first dance, the entire ballroom went silent. She was frozen, stuck to her chair, her face draining of color as the realization hit her. Everyone was looking at her. Everyone was whispering. But I was not looking at her. I was looking at my son, Brandon. I was waiting for him to realize that the trap they had set for his mother had just snapped shut on his own wife. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel guilt. I just took a sip of my wine and checked my watch. To understand why I sat there like a statue while my daughter-in-law was humiliated in front of 200 of Chicago's elite, you have to understand what happened 3 hours earlier. You have to understand that this wasn't an accident. It was war. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect someone you love from the people who should have loved them the most. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was still in semi-darkness when I walked in. I like to be early. It is a habit from my 40 years as a contractor. You check the site before the crew arrives. You check the foundation before you pour the concrete. I wanted to make sure the flowers were right for Patricia. She loves hydrangeas. But as I moved through the shadows of the side entrance, staying off the main carpet so my shoes wouldn't click, I heard a sound that didn't belong. It was a giggle, not a happy giggle. It was a cruel, low sound. I stopped behind a massive velvet curtain near the head table. My eyes adjusted to the dim light, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, hovering over the table where the parents were supposed to sit, were my son, Brandon, and his bride-to-be, Brittany. They were not sharing a romantic moment. They were working. Brittany was bent over a specific chair. I squinted. It was the chair to the immediate right of the groom. That was Patricia's chair, my wife's chair. In Brittany's hand was a bright orange tube. I know that tube. I have used it on job sites to bond steel to concrete. Gorilla Glue. The gel kind. The kind that doesn't just stick, it fuses. She was squeezing a thick, generous spiral of the clear adhesive onto the plush velvet cushion of the chair. She wasn't just putting a dot. She was painting the seat with it. Brandon was standing guard, looking toward the main doors. He wasn't stopping her. He was smiling. He was actually smiling. "Make sure you get the edges, babe," he whispered. The acoustics in the empty hall carried his voice straight to me. "I want her stuck good. She needs to learn her place." Brittany capped the glue and stood up, wiping her hands on a napkin. She looked at her handiwork with the pride of an artist. "This is going to be hilarious," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "When the old hag tries to stand up for the toast, she's going to be flopping around like a fish. Maybe she will finally break that other hip, and we can put her in a home sooner." They laughed. My own son, the boy I taught to ride a bike, the boy I put through private school, laughed at the idea of his mother breaking her bones. I felt a physical blow to my chest, harder than any hammer swing I had ever taken. My fists clenched at my sides. The urge to step out from behind that curtain and flatten him was overwhelming. I am 69 years old, but I spent my life lifting lumber and pouring cement. I could have snapped him in half. But I didn't move. I forced my breathing to slow down. If I confronted them now, they would deny it. They would say it was a joke. They would gaslight us. And the wedding would go on, and Patricia would still be vulnerable to them. No, you don't win a war by charging into machine gun fire. You win by flanking the enemy. I waited until they slipped out the side door, giggling like school children who had just vandalized a locker. Only then did I step out of the shadows. I walked to the head table, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure rage against my ribs. I looked at the chair. The glue was transparent, sitting on top of the deep blue velvet. In the dim lighting of the reception, it was invisible. If you didn't know it was there, you would sit right in it. I touched the edge of the cushion. It was tacky. It was already setting, but it would stay active for another hour. I looked at the place card sitting on the table in front of the chair. It was beautiful calligraphy on thick cardstock. Mother of the groom. Patricia. My mind flashed back to 3 months ago. The hospital room. The smell of antiseptic and fear. Patricia lying there, pale and small in that big bed. The doctor had been very clear. He looked me in the eye, and then he looked at Brandon, who was standing right there next to me. "Mr. Miller," he had said, "the surgery was successful, but the recovery is critical. Her hip socket is fragile. Any sudden jerking motion, any fall, or any extreme strain could dislocation the joint. If that happens, the damage could be permanent. She might never walk again." Brandon had nodded. He had heard every word. Brittany had been there too, scrolling on her phone, but she had heard it. They knew. This wasn't a prank. A prank is putting salt in the sugar bowl. A prank is a whoopee cushion. This was assault. If Patricia sat in this glue and then tried to stand up, the sudden resistance would jerk her body. The panic would make her twist. It could snap her hip like a dry twig. They weren't just trying to humiliate her. They were willing to cripple her for a laugh. They were willing to put her in a wheelchair for the rest of her life, just to get her out of the way, just to get access to our assets sooner. I looked at the chair again. It was a heavy, high-backed oak chair, rented specifically for the head table. It probably weighed 40 pounds. I couldn't swap the chair itself. If I dragged it across the floor, the scraping sound would alert the staff, and the chairs were arranged specifically for the spacing of the table settings. Moving the furniture was too risky. I looked at the glue again. It was a circle of hate. Then, I looked at the chair next to it. The bride. Brittany. It was pristine. Clean velvet. Ready for the princess. I looked around. The hall was still empty, but I could hear the clatter of silverware from the kitchen. The catering staff would be coming out any minute to set the water glasses. I had maybe 30 seconds. I reached out and picked up the place card that said Patricia. My hand didn't shake. It was steady. So I moved it to the clean chair. Then I picked up the card that said Brittany. I placed it gently in front of the glue-covered chair. I stepped back to check the alignment. The chairs were identical. The table settings were identical. The only difference was the name on the card and the invisible trap on the seat. Suddenly, the kitchen doors swung open. A young waiter with a pitcher of ice water walked in briskly. He stopped when he saw me standing at the head table. "Sir?" he asked, looking suspicious. "The guests aren't supposed to be in here yet." I didn't flinch. I turned to him with a calm, warm smile. The smile of a proud father, not a man who had just set a trap. "I know, son," I said, smoothing the tablecloth near the glue chair, careful not to touch it. "I just wanted to make sure everything was perfect for my wife. She has trouble walking, you know. Wanted to check the spacing." The waiter's face softened. He nodded respectfully. "That is very thoughtful of you, sir. It looks beautiful." "Yes," I said, looking at the glue that was slowly drying into a bond strong enough to hold a truck. "It is absolutely perfect." I walked out of the ballroom, passing the waiter. I went straight to the bar in the lobby and ordered a double scotch, neat. I needed to steady my nerves. I drank it in one swallow. The alcohol burned, but it didn't burn as hot as the anger in my gut. I checked my phone. I had a text from my assistant, Sarah. "Checks for the vendors are ready to go out tomorrow morning as instructed, and the deed transfer for the penthouse is on your desk for Monday." I stared at the screen. I had planned to give them the world. I had paid for this entire circus, The flowers, the food, the venue, the dress. I was going to hand them the keys to a $2 million penthouse as a wedding gift. I was going to retire and take Patricia to Italy, leaving the family business in Brandon's hands. I typed a reply. My thumb hit the keys hard. Hold everything. Do not mail the checks. Do not file the deed. Wait for my call. I put the phone in my pocket. The guests were starting to arrive. I saw Patricia coming through the revolving doors. She was using her cane, but she was smiling. She looked beautiful in her blue silk dress. She had spent weeks finding a dress that was elegant, but comfortable for her hip. She was so happy. She thought she was gaining a daughter today. I walked over to her and offered her my arm. "Ready, my love?" I asked. She squeezed my hand. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were bright. "I am so proud of him, George," she whispered. And Brittany looked so beautiful at the rehearsal. I really think we are going to be a real family. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yes, Patricia," I said, leading her toward the slaughterhouse. "We are definitely going to find out what kind of family we are tonight." I led her into the ballroom. The lights had been dimmed further for the dramatic entrance. The music was playing softly. I guided her toward the head table. I watched her eyes scan the table for her name. "Oh, there I am," she said, pointing to the clean chair. I held my breath. If Brittany or Brandon noticed the switch before they sat down, it was over. If they saw the cards had moved, they would know. We reached the table. Brittany and Brandon were already making their grand entrance on the other side of the room, soaking up the applause. They were waving, blowing kisses. Brittany looked triumphant. She looked like she owned the place. She was wearing a custom-made gown, lace and silk, fitted to perfection. We sat down. Patricia lowered herself slowly into the clean chair. I helped her adjust her cane. "Comfortable?" I asked. "Perfect," she said. I looked at the empty chair next to us. The glue chair. The card said Brittany. The bride and groom approached the table. Brandon looked at me, then he looked at his mother. His eyes darted to the chair she was sitting in. He frowned slightly. He was confused. He remembered putting the glue on the chair to the right. But his mother was sitting on the right. He looked at the chair next to her. Then Brittany arrived. She didn't look at the cards. She was too busy looking at the audience, blowing kisses to her bridesmaids. She was high on adrenaline and narcissism. She saw the empty chair next to the groom's spot. She assumed it was hers. It was, after all, the center of attention. She grabbed the back of the glue chair. Brandon opened his mouth to say something. I saw the panic flash in his eyes. He realized something was wrong with the geometry of the setup. But before he could speak, the DJ announced loud over the speakers, "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats." Brittany didn't wait. She threw her heavy train of expensive fabric over the back of the chair, and she sat down. She sat down hard. She did a little wiggle to get comfortable, pressing her hips firmly into the cushion to settle the layers of her dress. I saw Brandon freeze. He looked at me. I raised my glass of champagne to him. I didn't smile. I just stared him dead in the eye. The trap was set. The prey was caught. Now all we had to do was wait for the glue to cure, and wait for the music to stop. The dinner was about to be served, and it was going to be the coldest meal my son ever ate. The air in the grand ballroom was thick with expensive perfume and the low hum of 200 voices pretending to care about love. As the heavy mahogany doors swung open to welcome the general admission of guests, I stood by the entrance, serving as the silent pillar for my wife. Patricia was trembling slightly. It was not from nerves, but from the sheer physical effort of standing upright in heels she had insisted on wearing. She wanted to look tall for her son. She wanted to look strong. I could feel the heat radiating from her hip joint through her dress, a silent testament to the agony she was enduring just to be here, just to smile for the cameras that Brittany had stationed at every corner of the room. To anyone else, we looked like the picture-perfect parents of the groom, a successful contractor in a bespoke tuxedo and his elegant wife in blue silk. But I was not looking at the guests. I was watching the performance art taking place in the center of the room. Brittany and Brandon were receiving the early arrivals, the VIPs, the people whose approval Brittany craved like oxygen. She was radiant. I will give her that. She knew how to catch the light. But her eyes were cold. Every time she hugged a guest, her eyes were already scanning over their shoulder to see if someone more important had walked in. Patricia squeezed my arm. "George, look at them," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "They look like royalty. I am so happy we could give this to them." I didn't have the heart to tell her that the royalty she was admiring were actually executioners. I just patted her hand. "Let's go say hello," I said, guiding her forward. The walk across the marble floor was slow. Every click of Patricia's cane was a reminder of her fragility. I saw heads turn. I saw the pity in the eyes of my business associates. "Oh, poor George, his wife is failing." That is what they were thinking. But Patricia held her head high. She approached the happy couple with her arms open, ready to embrace the new daughter she thought she had gained. Brittany saw us coming. For a split second, her mask slipped. I saw it. A flash of annoyance, a curl of the lip. She looked at Patricia's cane the way one looks at a stain on a new carpet. It was an inconvenience to her aesthetic. But then, as quickly as it appeared, the mask was back in place. She beamed. She threw her hands up theatrically. "Mom! Dad! You made it!" She leaned in to air-kiss Patricia, careful not to let her makeup touch my wife's cheek, and careful not to actually make contact. It was a performance for the photographer, hovering 3 feet away. Flash, flash, flash. The dutiful daughter-in-law. Patricia, bless her heart, tried to hug Brittany for real. She reached out, tears in her eyes. "You look so beautiful, honey," Patricia said. "Welcome to the family." Brittany stiffened. She pulled back just an inch, creating a wall of ice between them. Then she lowered her voice. She pitched it perfectly so that the photographer couldn't hear, so that the guests nearby couldn't hear, but so that Patricia and I could hear every syllable. She put a hand on Patricia's shoulder, gripping it a little too hard. "Thanks, Mom," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Listen, we have a lot of important people here tonight. Investors, influencers, people who matter." She paused, looking pointedly at Patricia's cane. "So, do me a huge favor. Just find your seat and stay there, okay? Don't go shuffling around the room trying to mingle. You are moving so slowly, it is frankly a little depressing to watch. I don't want you bothering the guests with your situation. Just sit down, stay put, and try not to be a distraction, okay?" The words hit Patricia like a physical slap. I felt her body go rigid against mine. The light in her eyes, which had been so bright just moments ago, was extinguished instantly. She opened her mouth to speak, to apologize, because that is who Patricia is. She apologizes for existing. I didn't mean to," she stammered. Brittany didn't let her finish. She turned her dazzling smile to a woman in a red dress who had just walked in. "Oh, Mrs. Vanderwallet, so glad you could come," she shrieked, turning her back on us completely. I looked at Brandon. My son, the boy I raised to open doors for women, the boy I taught to respect his elders. He was standing right there. He had heard every word. He was adjusting his cufflinks, looking down at his polished shoes. He didn't say, "Brittany, don't speak to my mother that way." He didn't say, "Mom, you look great, ignore her." He looked up, met my eyes for a fraction of a second, and then looked away. "Yeah, Mom," he mumbled, barely audible. "Just go sit down. We don't want you tripping over the cables or something. It is better for everyone. Better for everyone." That was the phrase that sealed his fate. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It was the same calm I feel right before I pull the lever on a demolition charge. The building is still standing, people are still walking past it, but I know that the fuse is already lit. The structure is already dead. It just hasn't fallen yet. I tightened my grip on Patricia's arm, giving her the support she needed to keep from collapsing right there on the dance floor. "Come on, Patricia," I said, my voice steady and low. "Let's do as they say. Let's go to our seats." "George, am I embarrassing him?" she whispered as we turned away. Her voice broke my heart. "No, my love," I said. "You are the only real thing in this room." We made our way to the head table. The walk felt like a funeral march. I could feel the eyes of the guests on us, or rather, on her limp. I knew Brittany was watching our backs, probably rolling her eyes at her friends, making gestures about the old woman slowing down the party. I looked at the table as we approached. I saw the setup, the flowers, the candles, and the chairs, the two chairs side by side. I looked at the one with the name card that read, "Mother of the Groom." It was the clean chair, the safe chair, the one I had swapped, and next to it, the chair with the name card, "The Bride." The chair that was currently glistening under the chandelier lights, with a layer of industrial-grade adhesive that was tacky, strong, and waiting. Brittany had told Patricia to sit down and stay put. She had commanded it. She wanted my wife immobilized. She wanted her stuck in a corner, invisible and silent. The irony was so sharp, I could taste it like metal in my mouth. Brittany was about to get exactly what she asked for. Someone was going to be sitting down and staying put for the rest of the night. Someone was going to be unable to move, but it wasn't going to be Patricia. I pulled out the clean chair for my wife. "Here you go," I said gently. She sat down, sighing with relief as the weight came off her hip. She smoothed her dress, looking small and defeated. She folded her hands in her lap, ready to be the invisible, obedient old woman they wanted her to be. I sat down next to her and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady, my pulse was slow. I watched the room fill up. I watched the waiters weaving through the tables with trays of champagne. I watched the musicians tuning their instruments. And I watched Brittany and Brandon finishing their greeting line, laughing, shaking hands, soaking up the adoration. They were high on their own supply. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully bullied an old woman into submission. They thought the night belonged to them. I checked my watch. 7:15. Dinner service would start in 10 minutes. The speeches would follow. And then, the first dance. I took a sip of water. I wasn't thirsty. I was just cleansing my palate for the main course. Revenge, they say, is a dish best served cold, but tonight it was going to be served sticky and loud. "Come on over, kids," I thought, watching them start to move toward the table. "Your seats are ready." The distance from the entrance of the ballroom to the head table was only about 50 feet, but it felt like walking across a tightrope suspended over a canyon. Every step Patricia took was a victory against pain, and every step I took was a silent countdown to destruction. The master of ceremonies, a man with a voice too loud for the room, was urging everyone to take their seats so the dinner service could begin. The noise of 200 chairs scraping against the floor filled the air, a chaotic symphony of wood on parquet that masked the pounding of my own heart. I kept my hand firmly under Patricia's elbow, guiding her not just for support, but to steer her with absolute precision. We were approaching the kill zone. To my left, Brittany and Brandon were gliding toward the table with the easy confidence of people who believe they are untouchable. Brittany was practically floating, her massive gown taking up enough space for 3 people. As we neared the table, I saw it happen. It was a subtle movement, one you would miss if you were not looking for it. But I was watching with the intensity of a hawk. Brittany's eyes didn't go to the floral arrangements that cost me $4,000. They didn't go to the crystal champagne flutes. They darted straight to the seat of the chair on the right. She was checking her work. She was looking for the sheen of the glue. From her angle, under the ambient lighting, the gel was invisible against the dark velvet, but she knew it was there. She looked up at Brandon and gave him a quick, conspiratorial wink. It was a look that said, "Watch this." It was the look of a child about to pull the wings off a fly. Brandon smirked back, a weak, pathetic imitation of a smile that made my stomach turn. He was excited to see his mother humiliated. That smirk was the final nail in the coffin of my inheritance plans. We arrived at the chairs. This was the moment, the point of no return. Patricia hesitated. She looked at the chair I had guided her to, the one with the clean velvet, the one I had swapped the card to. "Is this right, George?" she asked softly. I thought the mother sat on the end. "Trust me, honey," I said, my voice smooth and reassuring. "The lighting is better here. You will look better in the photos." She smiled, trusting me implicitly, as she has for 40 years. She turned her back to the table. I held my breath. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Brittany watching us. She was practically vibrating with anticipation. She was waiting for Patricia to sit in the other chair. She was waiting for the trap she had set. But because of the card swap, she was disoriented. She assumed Patricia was moving to the wrong seat. But she didn't say anything because she didn't want to cause a scene yet. She wanted the glue to do the talking. Patricia lowered herself. Down. 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 She settled into the cushion. Brittany's eyes widened. She leaned forward slightly, her mouth half open, waiting for the reaction. She was waiting for the squelch. She was waiting for Patricia to try to shift her weight and realize she was stuck. She was waiting for the look of panic. But Patricia just let out a long sigh of relief. She shifted her hips to find a comfortable position. She moved freely. There was no glue. There was no trap. I saw the confusion wash over Brittany's face. It was priceless. She furrowed her brow, looking from Patricia to Brandon. I could see the gears turning in her head. Did the glue dry too fast? Did she miss the spot? Why wasn't the old woman stuck? She looked genuinely disappointed that my wife wasn't currently suffering. That disappointment told me everything I needed to know about her soul. Then Brittany shrugged. I saw her shoulders drop. She probably thought that the glue just needed time and body heat to activate. She decided to ignore it for now and focus on being the star of the show. "Well, sit down, everyone," she announced, her voice shrill and commanding. She moved to the chair next to Patricia, the chair that was originally assigned to the mother of the groom, the chair that was currently painted with a generous layer of Gorilla Glue. Brittany turned around. She grabbed the layers of her custom-made Italian silk gown. It was a magnificent dress, I have to admit. Layers of tulle, lace, and silk that cascaded around her like a waterfall. It was the kind of dress every girl dreams of, and it was the perfect camouflage for what was about to happen. She fluffed the back of the dress, ensuring it would fan out perfectly for the photos. In doing so, she ensured that the maximum amount of surface area would come into contact with the adhesive. She was essentially pressing the fabric into the trap with her own hands. She bent her knees. She lowered herself with the grace of a swan. And then she made contact. She sat down hard, letting her full weight sink into the plush cushion. I watched as the heavy silk of her dress compressed against the velvet of the chair. I imagined the chemical reaction happening underneath those layers. The pressure of her body was pushing the glue deep into the fibers of her dress. The gel was grabbing onto the lace, the silk, and the tulle, and simultaneously bonding with the fibers of the chair cushion. It was creating a bond that was stronger than the fabric itself. Brittany didn't feel a thing. That is the beauty and the danger of that specific glue. It is room temperature. It doesn't burn. It doesn't feel wet through thick layers of clothing. It just silently, instantly, becomes one with whatever touches it. She wiggled a little, getting comfortable. Good. Wiggling helped spread the adhesive. She leaned back, crossing her legs. Perfect. That shifted her weight and pressed the fabric even firmly into the trap. She was locking herself in. I sat down on the other side of Patricia. I reached for the bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon on the table. It was a 2015 vintage, expensive, full-bodied. I poured myself a glass, watching the dark red liquid swirl against the crystal. I took a sip. It tasted like justice. I looked over the rim of my glass at the happy couple. Brandon was pouring champagne, laughing at something Brittany whispered to him. Brittany was reapplying her lip gloss, using her phone as a mirror. She was completely oblivious. She was sitting on a time bomb, and she was checking her teeth. I felt a strange sense of detachment. Usually, on a construction site, when something goes wrong, when a wall collapses or a pipe bursts, there is panic. There is shouting. But this was different. This was a controlled demolition. The charges were set. The area was cleared of innocent bystanders. Patricia was safe, and the building was already coming down. Gravity just hadn't caught up with it yet. I looked at Patricia. She was admiring the centerpiece. "It is such a lovely party, George," she said. "Yes, it is," I replied, my eyes fixed on the hem of Brittany's dress where it met the chair leg. "It is going to be a night no one will ever forget." The waiters began to circulate with the appetizers. Lobster bisque. I ate slowly. I enjoyed every spoonful. I watched Brittany eat. She was animated, bouncing slightly in her seat as she talked to the maid of honor. Every bounce, every shift of her weight was curing the glue. The heat from her body was accelerating the chemical bonding process. By the time the salad course arrived, her dress wasn't just on the chair. It was part of the chair. She was no longer wearing a dress. She was wearing furniture. I checked my watch again. The speeches were scheduled for 8 o'clock. The first dance was at 8:30. 45 minutes. That was how long she had left of her dignity. I poured another glass of wine and settled in. I am a patient man. I have waited years for permits. I have waited months for concrete to cure. I could wait 45 minutes to watch the world burn. The waiter cleared the appetizer plates with the silent efficiency of a ghost. I watched his hands move. I watched everything. My senses were heightened, dialed up to a frequency that picked up every microaggression at the table. For the next hour, as the main course was served, I sat in the middle of a battlefield disguised as a celebration. The filet mignon arrived, searing hot and smelling of rosemary and garlic. It was a beautiful cut of meat. I had selected the menu myself. I had paid $75 a plate for this meal. And as I cut into the tender beef, I realized I was paying for the privilege of watching my son and his new wife dissect my wife's self-esteem. Brittany didn't pick up her fork immediately. She was too busy scrutinizing Patricia's plate. My wife had reached for a dinner roll, just a piece of bread. She loved the crusty sourdough the hotel baked fresh. Her hand was trembling slightly as she reached for the butter knife. Brittany leaned in. Her voice was low, confidential, the tone a nurse might use with a slow child. "Mom," she said, tilting her head, Are you sure about that bread? Patricia froze. Her hand hovered over the butter dish. She looked at Brittany with wide, uncertain eyes. I thought I would have a piece, Patricia whispered. Brittany sighed. It was a long, performative exhale that signaled deep, burdensome concern. She reached out and actually touched Patricia's wrist, stopping her. I am just thinking about your recovery, Brittany said, her eyes wide and innocent. You know, every extra pound is pressure on that artificial hip. The doctor said you need to stay light. Carbs are just inflammation waiting to happen. We don't want you collapsing under your own weight, do we? She smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a shark baring its teeth. Patricia pulled her hand back as if the bread were hot coal. She put the roll back on her side plate. She looked down at her lap, shame coloring her cheeks. You are right, Patricia murmured. I shouldn't. Thank you for looking out for me, dear. I saw Brandon nod in agreement. He was stuffing his face with steak, chewing with his mouth half open. But he nodded. Yeah, Mom, listen to Brittany, he said around a mouthful of meat. She knows about nutrition. You don't want to end up back in the hospital. We have plans this summer. We can't be babysitting you if you blow out your other hip-eating bread. I felt the handle of my steak knife pressing into my palm. I gripped it so hard my knuckles turned white. They weren't concerned about her health. They were disgusted by her weakness. They viewed her as a liability, a broken object that needed to be managed. I carefully placed my knife and fork down. I wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. I didn't look at Brandon. I didn't look at Brittany. I reached into my tuxedo pocket and pulled out my phone. I kept it under the table, resting on my thigh. I didn't need to look at the screen to know what I was doing. I knew the number for the bank's automated fraud and large transaction line. I also knew the number for my private banker, Michael, who was currently on speed dial. I opened the text thread with Michael. Override the transfer for the Maldives honeymoon package, I typed. Cancel the flights. Cancel the overwater bungalow. Full refund only. If not refundable, cancel anyway. I hit send. I took a sip of my wine. The message showed delivered. Somewhere in a system, $25,000 just vanished from their future. Brittany was still talking. She had moved on from the bread to the apartment. She was cutting her steak into tiny surgical pieces, ignorant of the fact that the glue beneath her was currently hardening into a permanent bond with her dress. So, Dad, she said, turning her attention to me. She called me Dad. It sounded like a slur coming from her mouth. We need to talk about the timeline for the penthouse. She was talking about the wedding gift. The 5-bedroom penthouse in the Gold Coast district. The one I had bought and renovated with my own hands 3 years ago, intending it to be my retirement home before deciding to gift it to them. What about it? I asked, my voice calm, flat. Well, Brandon and I were looking at the space yesterday, she said, waving her fork. And honestly, the interior is it is a little dated. It feels very heavy. All that dark wood and the marble, it feels like an old man's club. Brandon chimed in, eager to please his new master. Yeah, Dad, it is a bit depressing. We want to gut the living room, open it up. And the master bath? The jacuzzi tub has to go. It is unsanitary. We want a wet room, minimalist, white concrete. I stared at him. I had laid that marble tile myself. I had imported that wood from Brazil. It was craftsmanship. It was timeless. And they wanted to rip it out and replace it with trendy white concrete that would crack in 5 years. We got a quote from a contractor, Brittany continued, taking a sip of champagne. It is going to be about $60,000 for the demo and the remodel. Since the deed is transferring on Monday, we were hoping you could front us the renovation costs now. You know, so we can start work while we are on our honeymoon. We don't want to move into a construction zone. She smiled expectantly. She wasn't asking. She was demanding. She assumed the money was an infinite tap that she could turn on whenever she pleased. I looked at Patricia. She was pushing her peas around her plate, afraid to eat them in case Brittany criticized her calorie intake. She looked small. She looked tired. I looked back at Brittany. She shifted in her seat. I saw the fabric of her dress pull tight against the chair leg. The glue was doing its job. She was anchored. She just didn't know it yet. I picked up my phone again. 60,000, I repeated. To fix a brand new apartment. Brittany rolled her eyes playfully. It is not fixing, Dad. It is curating. We need the space to reflect our brand. We are going to be hosting a lot. We need it to be Instagrammable. The current look is just dusty. Dusty. My life's work was dusty. I unlocked my phone. I opened the text thread with Sarah, my executive assistant. Do not file the deed transfer on Monday, I typed. Contact the realtor. Put the penthouse back on the market. List it as fully furnished, immediate occupancy. Change the locks tonight. I hit send. That was a $2 million text message. I looked up at them. I will see what I can do, I lied. Brittany clapped her hands together. Oh my gosh, thank you. That is amazing. You are the best. She turned to Brandon and kissed him on the cheek. See? I told you he would do it. We just have to push him a little. She whispered it, but I heard it. I hear everything. The dinner continued. The waiters cleared the plates. Dessert was coming. Wedding cake. A 5-tier tower of vanilla and raspberry that cost more than my first car. Brittany leaned toward Patricia again. The shark was circling back for another bite. Mom, you are not going to have cake, are you? She asked. Patricia looked up, startled. I thought a small slice. Brittany shook her head. Sugar is terrible for inflammation. Really, Mom. I am telling you this because I love you. You look swollen. Your face looks puffy. I think you should stick to water. Maybe hot water with lemon. It will help flush out the toxins. Brandon laughed. Yeah, Mom. Detox. You want to look good for the family photos, don't you? Patricia put her napkin on the table. She looked like she was about to cry. I am not hungry anyway, she whispered. That was it. That was the final straw. They had taken her food. They had taken her dignity. They had taken her joy. And they thought they were taking my money. I felt a vibration in my pocket. A confirmation text from the bank. The honeymoon was canceled. Another vibration. A confirmation from Sarah. The locks were being changed within the hour. I looked at Brittany. She was shifting her weight again, preparing to stand up for the speeches. She planted her feet. She grabbed the edge of the table. I took a deep breath. I savored the air in the room. It was the calm before the storm. The glue was cured. The trap was shut. The money was gone. The house was gone. And in about 10 minutes, the dress was going to be gone too. I reached over and took Patricia's hand. I squeezed it hard. Eat the cake, Patricia, I said loud enough for them to hear. She looked at me, surprised. What? I said. Eat the cake. Eat the whole damn slice. You are going to need the energy. Brittany scoffed. George, really, don't undermine me. I am trying to help her. I turned my gaze to Brittany. It was the first time all night I really looked at her. I looked past the makeup, past the diamonds, past the silk. I looked right into the empty, greedy void where her soul was supposed to be. You have done enough helping, Brittany, I said. You have secured your place in this family. You have really stuck the landing. She looked confused by my tone, but she dismissed it. She checked her reflection in her spoon one last time. "Whatever," she muttered. The lights dimmed. The spotlight swiveled toward our table. The master of ceremonies walked onto the stage, microphone in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, "I hope you enjoyed that wonderful meal. Now, before we cut the cake, we would like to invite the happy couple to the center of the floor for their first dance as husband and wife." The applause started. It was polite, rhythmic clapping. Brandon stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked handsome. I will give him that. He looked like a man who had it all. He extended his hand to his bride. "Ready, babe?" he asked. Brittany beamed. This was her moment. The moment she had been rehearsing for months. All eyes were on her. She grabbed Brandon's hand. She planted her feet. She engaged her legs. She pushed up. And nothing happened. The chair rose with her. For a microsecond, she thought it was just a snag. She pulled harder. And then the sound began. The waiters had just finished clearing the dessert plates, leaving behind only the faint scent of vanilla and the heavy, lingering anticipation of the evening's main event. I sat back in my chair, swirling the last dregs of wine in my glass, watching the bubbles rise and pop. It is a strange thing to watch time slow down. Usually time moves too fast. Construction deadlines rush toward you like a freight train. But tonight, time was moving like molasses. It was thick, heavy, and sweet. I looked at Brittany. She was dabbing the corner of her mouth with a napkin, checking her reflection in the back of a spoon. She looked perfect. She looked victorious. She had no idea that she was already a prisoner in her own fairy tale. The room began to dim, the chandeliers fading out until only the amber glow of the table candles remained. The murmur of conversation died down, replaced by the crackle of a microphone being switched on. The master of ceremonies, a man in a tuxedo that was slightly too tight across the shoulders, stepped into the center of the dance floor. He had that energetic, radio DJ voice that commands attention whether you want to give it or not. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and family," he boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We hope you have enjoyed the dinner. Now we have come to the moment everyone has been waiting for. It is time to cut the cake, and then we will clear the floor for the first dance of the evening." A polite ripple of applause moved through the room. I didn't clap. My hands were resting on the tablecloth, flat and steady. I was grounding myself. "So, if I could please ask everyone to turn their attention to the head table," the MC continued, raising his hand dramatically. "Let's make some noise for the brand new Mr. and Mrs. Miller." The DJ hit a button. A heavy driving beat kicked in. It was some modern pop song, something about being on top of the world. The irony was almost too much to bear. At the same moment, a high-powered spotlight mounted on the balcony truss swung down. It cut through the darkness like a laser, hitting our table with blinding intensity. The light bypassed me. It bypassed Patricia. It landed squarely on Brandon and Brittany. It was a circle of pure white brilliance, illuminating every detail. I could see the sequins on Brittany's bodice sparkling like diamonds. I could see the sheen of sweat on Brandon's forehead. They were the stars of the show, and like all stars, they were about to burn out. Brandon stood up first. He moved easily, buttoning his jacket with one hand and running the other through his hair. He flashed a smile at the crowd, waving to his college buddies who were hooting from table 9. He looked the part of the successful heir. He looked down at his wife, extending his hand to her with a flourish. "Come on, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice loud enough to carry over the music. "Let's show them how it's done." Brittany looked up at him. Her face was glowing. This was it. This was the payoff for all the dieting, all the planning, all the money she had demanded I spend. She placed her hand in his. Her manicured nails dug slightly into his palm. She took a deep breath, preparing to rise like a queen ascending her throne. She planted her feet firmly on the floor. She was wearing 4-inch heels, which gave her calves a sharp, defined look. She shifted her weight forward, engaging her legs. She had done this movement 1,000 times. You lean forward, you push off your heels, and you rise. It is simple physics. It is the most basic human movement. She pushed, and the world stopped. She didn't move. Well, that isn't entirely accurate. Her upper body moved. Her shoulders went up a fraction of an inch. Her neck extended. But her hips? Her hips were anchored to the earth. It was as if gravity had suddenly increased tenfold directly under her seat. She frowned. It was a small, confused micro-expression. The smile didn't leave her face entirely, but her eyes narrowed. She thought, naturally, that she had just lost her balance. Or maybe she hadn't pushed hard enough. The dress was heavy, after all. It had layers and layers of fabric. She let go of Brandon's hand for a second to adjust her grip on the armrests of the chair. She gave a little nervous laugh, looking at the audience. "Whoops," she mouthed. "Heavy dress." She gripped the wood of the chair arms. Her knuckles turned white. She wasn't playing around this time. She was going to hoist herself up. She took a breath, gritted her teeth behind her smile, and shoved downward with her arms while driving upward with her legs. I watched the muscles in her arms tense. I watched the tendons in her neck stand out. Nothing happened. She was stuck. It wasn't the kind of stuck where a zipper catches on a piece of lace. It wasn't a snag. It was a solid, immovable bond. The Gorilla Glue had done exactly what the label promised. It had cured into a hard, plastic-like resin. It had soaked through the tulle, through the silk, through the lining of her dress, through her Spanx, and into the fibers of the velvet cushion. It had created a single, unified object. Brittany was no longer a woman sitting on a chair. She and the chair were one continuous structural entity. She froze. The panic started to bleed into her expression. She looked down at her lap. She couldn't see anything. The skirt of the dress was too poofy. It covered the crime scene perfectly. She tried to slide forward. She couldn't slide. She tried to twist to the side. She couldn't twist. Brandon was still holding his hand out, his smile starting to waver. "Babe, come on," he hissed through his teeth. "Everyone is watching. Get up." "I can't," she whispered back. Her voice was tight, high-pitched. "What do you mean you can't? Stop being dramatic. Just stand up." "I am trying," she snapped, forgetting to whisper. "I am stuck. The dress is caught on something." She wasn't just caught. She was welded. I knew the physics of what was happening. To stand up, she would have to lift not just her own body weight, but the weight of the solid oak chair clamped to her backside. That chair weighed 40 pounds. And because of the leverage, because the weight was attached to her rear, she couldn't get her center of gravity over her feet. Every time she tried to stand, the chair tipped forward with her, throwing her off balance and forcing her back down. She gave a violent jerk. She threw her upper body forward, trying to use momentum to break free. The chair lifted 2 inches off the ground. I saw the front legs hover in the air. But as soon as they lifted, the weight of the chair dragged her back down. Thud. The chair legs hit the floor. Brittany gasped. She looked at Brandon with genuine terror in her eyes. This wasn't a snag. A snag tears. A snag rips. This was something else. This felt like a hand reaching up from hell and grabbing her. "Brandon, help me," she pleaded. "I am really stuck. I think there is something on the chair." Brandon rolled his eyes. He looked at the guests. The applause had died down. People were starting to whisper. The spotlight was still blindingly hot, cooking them in their own embarrassment. "Jesus, Brittany," Brandon muttered. He stepped in close, grabbing her arm. He wasn't gentle. He was embarrassed. And when Brandon is embarrassed, he gets mean. "I am going to pull you. On the count of 3. Just stand up." "No, wait," she said. But he was already pulling. He braced his foot against the table leg. He gripped her forearm with both hands. He looked like he was trying to pull a stubborn weed out of the ground. 1, 2, 3. He yanked her. Brittany screamed. Not a loud scream, but a sharp yelp of pain. The force of his pull lifted her body, but the chair came with her. It rose 6 inches into the air, dangling from her dress like a bizarre wooden tail. The glue held fast. The bond was stronger than the fabric, stronger than the stitching, stronger than gravity. For a second, she hovered there, suspended in a crouch, the chair hanging off her. She looked ridiculous. She looked like a grotesque puppet. Then, gravity won. She crashed back down onto the seat. The impact rattled the silverware on the table. The music was still pounding. The bass was shaking the floor. But at our table there was a bubble of silence. Brandon stared at her. He looked at the chair. He looked at her dress. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he demanded. Brittany was hyperventilating now. She was clawing at the fabric around her hips, her fingernails scraping uselessly against the layers of tulle. "I don't know," she cried. "It won't let go. It feels like glue." She said the word. Glue. She looked up. Her eyes met mine. I was sitting calmly, my hands folded. I hadn't moved a muscle. I looked at her, and then I let my gaze drift slowly, deliberately, to the empty chair next to her. The chair with the clean velvet. The chair where Patricia was sitting comfortably, sipping her water. Then I looked back at Brittany. I allowed the corner of my mouth to lift just a fraction of a millimeter. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened in a perfect O of shock. She remembered. She remembered the orange tube. She remembered the spiral of gel. She remembered the prank. She looked at the place card in front of her. It said the bride. She looked at the place card in front of Patricia. It said mother of the groom. But the chairs were wrong. She knew. In that split second, she knew everything. She knew I had seen them. She knew I had switched the cards. She knew she was sitting in her own trap, and she knew there was no way out. The glue was industrial strength. It wasn't water-soluble. It wasn't going to release her. The only way she was leaving that chair was if she left the dress behind. The MC, sensing the delay, tried to fill the dead air. "Looks like the bride is just too comfortable to leave the table. Let's give them some encouragement, folks." The crowd cheered again. The spotlight intensified. Brandon, unaware of the silent communication passing between me and his wife, decided to take drastic measures. He wasn't going to let his perfect moment be ruined by a wardrobe malfunction. "Stand. Up," he growled. He moved behind her. He grabbed her under the armpits. He was going to lift her physically. He was going to force the issue. Brittany tried to stop him. "No, Brandon, don't. The dress, it's stuck to the—" But he didn't listen. He heaved upward with all his strength. And that is when the sound happened. Brandon looked at his wife with a mixture of confusion and contempt that only a spoiled child can muster when his toys aren't working. The music was building to a crescendo, the drums kicking in with a relentless, thumping rhythm that vibrated through the floorboards. But between us at the head table, the air was static. He leaned in close to her ear, his hand gripping her bicep hard enough to bruise. "Brittany," he hissed, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Get up, right now. People are staring. You are making me look like an idiot. She looked at him, her eyes wide and wet with panic. She shook her head frantically, mouthing the words, "I am stuck again." But he wasn't listening. He was done listening. He was watching the guests. He saw the whispers starting at table 5. He saw his boss at table 12 frowning. He made a decision. If she wouldn't stand up on her own, he would make her. He stepped back, assuming the posture of a man about to lead his bride to the floor. He plastered a fake, terrified smile on his face. "Let's go, darling," he shouted, loud enough for the microphone to pick up. He grabbed both of her hands. He planted his feet, and he pulled. Brittany had no choice. She knew that if she didn't stand now, he would drag her, and that would be even worse. She had to break free. She assumed in her desperation that whatever was holding her was just a sticky residue. Maybe gum. Maybe candy. She thought if she just used enough force, it would snap, and she would be free. She didn't understand the chemistry of what she was sitting on. She didn't understand that the bond between her dress and the chair was now stronger than the structural integrity of the silk itself. She grit her teeth. She squeezed her eyes shut. She channeled every ounce of vanity, every ounce of rage, and every ounce of strength she possessed into her legs. She wasn't standing up to dance. She was standing up to save her life. She drove her heels into the carpet. She screamed a silent scream inside her throat, and she launched herself upward with explosive force, aided by Brandon's violent yank on her arms. Time didn't just slow down. It shattered. I watched it happen in high definition. I saw the muscles in her thighs contract. I saw her body lift. And then, I heard it. It wasn't a simple rip. It wasn't the sound of a seam popping. It was a violent, jagged, tearing screech that cut through the bass of the pop music like a gunshot. It sounded like a sail being shredded in a hurricane. The sound seemed to go on for 5 seconds. It started at the base of her spine and tore downward, branching out to the left and right. The Italian silk, woven by artisans in Milan, screamed in protest as it was forced to choose between the woman and the wood. It chose the wood. Brittany shot up to a standing position, propelled by the release of tension. She stumbled forward, crashing into Brandon's chest. But the back of her dress didn't go with her. I sat there sipping my water and looked at the chair. It was a masterpiece of destruction. Adhered to the seat, perfect and flat, was the entire rear panel of her wedding gown. The layers of tulle, the hand-stitched lace, the silk lining, it was all there, fused to the velvet cushion by the orange adhesive she had applied with her own hands. It looked like a skin that had been shed. It was a perfect mold of where she had been sitting. And then I looked at Brittany. She was standing in the center of the spotlight. The front of her dress was still intact, hanging off her frame like a bib. But the back was gone. The spotlight, cruel and bright, illuminated the reality that lay beneath the fantasy. Brittany wasn't wearing sexy bridal lingerie. She wasn't wearing delicate lace panties. She was wearing Spanx, heavy-duty, industrial strength, beige compression shapewear. It started at her mid-back and went down to her mid-thighs. It was the kind of garment designed to squeeze flesh into submission, to create the illusion of a perfect body. It was functional. It was medical. And under the harsh glare of the halogen lights, it was possibly the unsexiest thing human eyes had ever seen. The fabric of the shapewear was thick and rubbery, struggling to contain her. Where the dress had torn away, there were jagged threads of silk hanging down, framing her backside like a ragged curtain. The room went silent. The music was still playing, but nobody heard it. 200 guests, judges, CEOs, socialites, the people whose validation she craved more than oxygen, were staring at her exposed rear end. For a moment, Brittany didn't know. She was just relieved to be standing. She was breathing heavy, clutching Brandon's lapels. She thought she had won. She thought she had broken free. She looked up at Brandon, smiling a frantic, breathless smile. "I did it!" she panted. "I am up!" Brandon wasn't smiling. He was looking over her shoulder. His face had gone the color of ash. His mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. He was staring at the beige wall of elastic that was currently facing the entire ballroom. Brittany saw his expression. She felt the draft. The air conditioning in the ballroom was set to 68 degrees. She felt the cold air hitting skin that should have been covered by $5,000 worth of fabric. She felt the lack of weight behind her. She slowly reached her hand around to her back. Her fingers didn't find silk. They didn't find lace. They found the rubbery, tight texture of the compression shorts. And beyond that, they found nothing, just air. She turned her head. She followed Brandon's gaze. She looked at the chair behind her. She saw the back of her dress sitting there, mocking her. And then she heard the sound. It started as a gasp from the front table, then a giggle from the back, and then a camera shutter. Click. Then another click, click. The influencers she had invited. The friends she tried so hard to impress. They weren't rushing to help her with a tablecloth. They were holding up their phones. They were live streaming. Brittany spun around, trying to hide. But in spinning, she just exposed the damage to the other side of the room. She was trapped in a 360-degree nightmare. She grabbed the front of her ruined dress, trying to pull it down, trying to stretch the fabric to cover herself. But it was useless. The dress was decimated. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the phones pointing at her like weapons. And then, finally, she looked at me. I raised my glass of water in a silent toast. The look on her face wasn't just embarrassment. It was the total psychological collapse of a narcissist who realizes the mirror has shattered. Her lips trembled. Her knees knocked together. And then, the screaming started. Not from the dress this time, but from her. A high, thin wail of pure mortification that echoed off the vaulted ceiling and surely made the angels weep with laughter. The sound that left Brittany's throat was shrill enough to crack the crystal flutes on the table. It wasn't just a scream of embarrassment. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality shattering into a million jagged pieces. For a split second, the ballroom was paralyzed in a state of collective shock. The kind of silence that happens right after a car crash before the bystanders start running. But then, the silence broke. It didn't break with applause or sympathy. It broke with the digital hunger of the modern age. I watched from my seat as the guests, the very people Brittany had curated for their status and influence, reacted on instinct. They didn't rush forward with tablecloths to cover the bride's exposed backside. They didn't turn away to give her privacy. One by one, then in a wave the smartphones came out. The flashlights turned on. The recording lights blinked red. I saw Mrs. Vanderwallet, the woman Brittany had been fawning over earlier, hold her phone high to get a better angle of the beige Spanx and the shredded silk. The humiliation was being broadcast in real time. Brittany was trending, but not in the way she had dreamed. Brittany spun around, trying to shield herself, but every turn just exposed her to a different sector of the room. She was hyperventilating, her hands clawing at the air, looking for something, anything, to wrap around her waist, but there was nothing. Her dress was destroyed. The back panel was still sitting stoically on the chair, fused to the velvet like a trophy skin. Then, the panic in her eyes shifted. It hardened. It calcified into something ugly and sharp. She stopped spinning. She looked down at the chair she had just vacated. She saw the glint of the adhesive. She saw the place card that still read, "The Bride." And then her head snapped toward Patricia. Patricia was sitting with her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with genuine confusion and horror. She had no idea what was happening. She didn't know about the glue. She didn't know about the swap. All she saw was her daughter-in-law standing half-naked and screaming. Brittany lunged. She didn't step. She threw herself across the gap between them. Her hand swept across the table, knocking over the centerpiece. Water and flowers spilled across the white linen, soaking into the fabric like a metaphor for the evening. "You!" Brittany shrieked, her finger stabbing the air inches from Patricia's face. "You senile old witch! You did this!" Patricia recoiled, pressing her back against her clean, safe chair. "Brittany, I don't understand," Patricia stammered, her voice trembling. "Don't lie to me!" Brittany screamed, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "You swapped the cards! You knew! You knew I put the glue there! You wanted to ruin me!" The accusation hung in the air, loud and clear. She had just admitted it. In her blind rage, she had confessed. She yelled that she had put the glue there. But the crowd was too busy filming the spectacle to process the confession yet. They just heard a bride screaming at a crippled old woman. Brittany tried to grab Patricia. She reached out, her fingers hooked like talons, aiming for my wife's shoulders. She wanted to shake her. She wanted to hurt her. She wanted to make someone else feel the pain she was feeling. But before she could make contact, I saw a blur of motion. It wasn't me. It was Brandon. For a heartbeat, I thought he was intervening to stop his wife from assaulting his mother. I thought, maybe, just maybe, there was a spark of decency left in him. I thought he was going to restrain Brittany and apologize. I was wrong. Brandon grabbed Brittany's waist, not to pull her back, but to steady her. He looked at the ruined dress. He looked at the laughing crowd. He looked at the live-streaming phones. And then, he turned his rage on the easiest target in the room. He looked at his mother. "Mom!" he bellowed, his face turning a deep, blotchy red. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Patricia flinched as if he had hit her. "Brandon?" she whispered. "Are you crazy?" Brandon shouted, slamming his hand down on the wet tablecloth. "Look at what you did. You ruined the wedding. Why can't you just be normal? Why do you always have to make everything about you?" He was rewriting history in real time. In his mind, his mother's refusal to sit in a trap was an act of aggression. In his twisted logic, her survival was an attack on his wife. Brittany, seeing she had an ally, ramped up her attack. "She tried to kill me, Brandon. She knew the glue was there. She wanted me to sit in it. Look at my dress. It cost $15,000. She grabbed a handful of the shredded silk hanging from her waist and shook it at Patricia. "You are going to pay for this!" Brittany screamed. "I am going to sue you! I am going to take every penny you have!" Patricia began to cry. Not the polite, silent tears of a wedding guest, but the racking, heaving sobs of a mother whose heart is breaking. She looked at Brandon, searching for her son, but all she found was a stranger in a tuxedo who was worried about his reputation. I didn't do anything," Patricia sobbed. "I just sat where the card was." "Liar!" Brandon yelled. He leaned over the table, looming over her. "You always pull this victim act. Oh, poor Patricia with her bad hip. You did this on purpose to humiliate Brittany because you are jealous. You are jealous that she is young and beautiful, and you are just old." The cruelty of his words was breathtaking. It was a physical assault. I sat there, my hand still holding my water glass, feeling the cold condensation against my palm. I watched my son destroy the last bridge back to his family. He wasn't just defending his wife. He was actively participating in the abuse. He was choosing the predator over the prey. The guests were murmuring now. The spectacle had shifted from comedy to tragedy. Some people were lowering their phones, sensing that this had gone too far. But others, the vultures, kept recording. Brittany wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smearing her makeup. She looked deranged. "Get out!" she screamed at Patricia. "Get out of my wedding! I don't want to see your ugly face!" Brandon pointed to the door. "You heard her, Mom. Leave. You are not welcome here. Go take your cane and your jealousy and get out." Patricia tried to stand up. She gripped the armrests of her chair, her safe, glue-free chair, and pushed herself up. She was shaking so badly she could barely support her own weight. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for an explanation, for protection, for an exit from this nightmare. I didn't say a word. I didn't shout back. I didn't engage in their screaming match. That is what they wanted. They wanted a fight. They wanted noise to cover up their guilt. I simply stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked around the back of Patricia's chair. I placed my hand on her shoulder, feeling the tremors running through her small frame. I looked at Brandon. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't look at him with anger. I looked at him with the absolute indifference of a stranger. Then I raised my hand and signaled to the back of the room. The hotel manager, a serious man named Mr. Henderson, who I had tipped $500 earlier that evening, nodded. He spoke into his headset. The house lights came up full blast. The romantic mood lighting vanished, replaced by the harsh, unflattering glare of the cleaning lights. The music cut out abruptly in the middle of a chorus. The room went dead silent. I turned to Brandon, my voice calm, leveled, and loud enough to be heard in the back row. "She isn't going anywhere, Brandon, but you might want to call your lawyer, because I think the police are going to have some questions about that orange tube in your jacket pocket." There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a construction site right before a controlled explosion. The sirens have stopped wailing, the workers have cleared the area, and for a split second, the air feels heavy with the promise of destruction. That was the atmosphere in the ballroom as I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't knock over my chair. I simply placed my linen napkin on the table, lining up the edges with the kind of precision that only a man who has spent 40 years measuring angles can possess. Brandon was still towering over his mother, his face twisted into a mask of ugly, misplaced righteousness. He was raising his hand, not to strike her. I don't think he had the guts for that. But to herd her, to intimidate her, to force her out of the room like unwanted cattle. His finger was inches from her nose, and he was taking a breath to scream another insult, another lie to cover his own tracks. I closed the distance between us in 2 strides. My dress shoes made no sound on the carpet. I reached out and wrapped my hand around Brandon's wrist. I didn't squeeze. I didn't twist. I just held it. My hands are not soft. They are calloused from decades of handling rebar and pouring concrete. They are hands that built the roof over his head and the school he attended. And right now, they were the hands of a stranger. Brandon froze. The sudden ironclad grip on his arm short-circuited his rage. He looked down at my hand, then up at my face. For a moment, he looked like the 5-year-old boy who had broken a vase and was terrified of the consequences. But the fear in his eyes was quickly replaced by annoyance. He tried to pull his arm away. He couldn't. I was an anchor, and he was a drifting boat. "Dad, let go," he snapped, trying to keep his voice low, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. "This doesn't concern you. Mom is having a breakdown. I need to get her out of here before she ruins Brittany's night completely." I didn't let go. Instead, I tightened my grip just enough to make him wince. I stepped in closer, invading his personal space, forcing him to look at me. I wanted him to see the disappointment in my eyes. I wanted him to feel the weight of the bridge he was burning. "She isn't having a breakdown, Brandon," I said. My voice was low, calm, and terrifyingly steady. It cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a diamond cutter through glass. And she isn't going anywhere. Brandon scoffed, a nervous, jerky sound. Dad, look at her! She swapped the cards! She admitted it! Brittany is humiliated! I looked past him to Brittany, who was still clutching her ruined dress, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Then I looked back at my son. She didn't swap the cards, I said, allowing my voice to rise just enough so the people at the nearby tables, the ones holding their phones up like vultures, could hear every syllable. And she didn't swap the seats. Your mother sat exactly where she was supposed to sit. She sat in the chair that was clean. She sat in the chair that was safe. Brandon opened his mouth to argue, to spin more lies, but I cut him off. You see, son, sometimes the universe has a way of correcting mistakes. Sometimes karma isn't a long game. Sometimes it is instant. Your wife isn't sitting in that glue because of a trick. She is sitting in it because that is the seat that nature intended for someone with a soul that dirty. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath. I had just called the bride a dirty soul at her own wedding. But I wasn't done. I had to nail the coffin shut. Brandon's face went pale. He tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a choke. That is insane, Dad. You are talking crazy. Glue? What glue? We don't know anything about glue. I smiled. It was a cold, mirthless smile. Oh, you don't? I asked. Then you wouldn't mind explaining to these good people, to your investors, to your friends, and to the camera that is live streaming this right now. What exactly is inside the left breast pocket of your tuxedo? Brandon stopped breathing. His hand twitched. He fought the urge to check his pocket, but the human brain is wired to react. His eyes darted down to his chest. He knew that in the rush to get into the reception, in the excitement of their little prank, he had shoved the tube of Gorilla Glue into his inside pocket. He had forgotten to throw it away. Check it, Brandon, I commanded. Show everyone the souvenir you kept from your little art project. He didn't move. He stood there, paralyzed by the sudden realization that I knew everything. He realized that I had been watching. He realized that the father he thought was just a senile bank account was actually always 3 steps ahead of him. I let go of his wrist. He stumbled back a step, rubbing his arm. I don't have to show you anything, he stammered, his voice cracking. This is harassment. You don't have to, I agreed, but the cap is sticking out. Every eye in the room followed my gaze, and there it was. Against the crisp black silk of his tuxedo lapel, a tiny bright orange plastic cap was visible. It was the undeniable smoking gun. Brittany saw it too. She let out a small, strangled sound. She realized that her accomplice, her partner in crime, had been walking around with the murder weapon in his pocket the whole night. I turned my back on him. I was done with him. I turned to the crowd, addressing the room with the authority of a man who has nothing left to hide. My wife, Patricia, is recovering from hip surgery, I announced. My voice was clear, ringing with the truth. If she had sat in that chair, if she had been stuck and tried to stand, her hip would have shattered. She would be in an ambulance right now. That is what my son and his new wife found funny. That is what they planned. I looked back at Brandon one last time. You wanted a memorable wedding, I said. Congratulations. You got one. Now, if you will excuse us, I think we have some videos to watch. I signaled to the projection booth. The large screen behind the stage, which had been showing a slideshow of their fake, curated romance, flickered. It went black for a second. And then, the timestamp appeared. It was time for the feature presentation. Brandon buttoned his tuxedo jacket so fast he nearly ripped the fabric. His hands were shaking violently, fumbling with the button to hide the orange cap that had just betrayed him. But it was too late. The image was already burned into the retinas of every person in the room. He looked around, his eyes wild and desperate, scanning the crowd for a friendly face, for anyone who would buy the lie he was about to sell. But there were no friendly faces. There were only cameras, judgmental stares, and the cold, unyielding silence of a jury that had already reached a verdict. He turned back to me, his face twisting into a mask of ugly, defensive rage. He decided to double down. He decided that if he yelled loud enough, he could drown out the truth. "This is a setup!" he screamed, his voice cracking under the strain. "You planted this! You put this in my pocket when I hugged you earlier." He pointed a trembling finger at me. "My father is sick," he shouted to the crowd, spinning around to address the guests. "He has dementia. He is paranoid. He has been trying to sabotage my relationship with Brittany for months because he can't stand to see me happy. He made this whole thing up." I watched him with a mixture of pity and disgust. It is a terrible thing to watch your own child disintegrate. It is a terrible thing to realize that the boy you raised to be a man has grown up to be a coward. He was willing to label me mentally incompetent, to destroy my reputation, just to save his own skin. He turned to his best man, a young lawyer named Jason, who looked like he wanted to dissolve into the floor. "Jason, you are a witness," Brandon yelled. "He is slandering me. I want to file a suit. I want a restraining order. This is defamation of character." He looked back at me, his eyes narrowing. "I am going to sue you for everything you have, Dad. I am going to have you declared incompetent, and I am going to put you in a home where you can't hurt anyone else. You are done." The threat hung in the air. It was the final betrayal. He wasn't just greedy. He was predatory. He was threatening to use the legal system to lock me away so he could loot my estate. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I just reached into my pocket and pulled out a small laser pointer. I keep it for site inspections, but tonight it was a conductor's baton. "You can try to sue me, Brandon," I said, my voice calm and projecting easily to the back of the room. "But in a court of law, you need evidence. And unfortunately for you, I brought my own." I pressed the button on the laser pointer and aimed a red dot at the projection booth high above the ballroom floor. "Roll it, Mr. Henderson," I said. The massive screen behind the stage, which had been black since I cut the feed, flickered to life. The guests turned their heads in unison. Even Brittany, who was still shivering in her ruined dress, looked up. The image that appeared wasn't a professional wedding video. It was raw, high-definition security footage. It was grainy, shot from a high angle, but the clarity was undeniable. It was black and white, but the truth it told was colorful enough. The timestamp in the corner read 5:45 p.m. 2 hours ago. The room watched in breathless silence as two figures walked into the empty frame. Even from the back, they were unmistakable. The massive tulle skirt, the tuxedo. It was Brandon and Brittany. On the screen, they walked up to the head table. They looked around furtively. The video showed Brittany reaching into Brandon's jacket pocket, the same pocket he was currently trying to hide, and pulling out the orange tube. A collective gasp went through the room. It was one thing to hear me accuse them. It was another thing entirely to see it. The video zoomed in. Mr. Henderson was doing a fantastic job. The digital zoom was pixelated, but clear. We watched Brittany uncap the glue. We watched her lean over the chair, Patricia's chair. We saw the motion of her arm as she squeezed the adhesive onto the velvet. She didn't just dab it. She swirled it. She painted it. And then, the audio kicked in. I had paid extra for the audio feed. The hotel's security system had sensitive microphones for liability reasons, and tonight, they were worth every penny. "Make sure you get the edges, babe." Brandon's voice boomed through the ballroom speakers. It was distorted, tinny, but undeniably him. "I want her stuck good. She needs to learn her place." The Brandon on the screen laughed. The Brandon in the room turned pale as a sheet. Then came Brittany's voice, sharp and cruel. "When the old hag tries to stand up for the toast, she's going to be flopping around like a fish. Maybe she will finally break that other hip." The crowd erupted. It wasn't polite whispering anymore. It was an audible wave of revulsion. Someone in the back shouted, "That is sick!" A woman at a nearby table covered her mouth with her hand, looking from the screen to Patricia with tears in her eyes. The video continued. We watched them high-five. We watched them kiss, a celebration of their cruelty. And then, we watched them switch the place cards back, ensuring the trap was set for the mother of the groom. The screen went black. The lights came back up. The silence that followed was heavy, judgmental, and absolute. I looked at the guests. The transformation was complete. 10 minutes ago, they were envious of this beautiful, wealthy couple. Now, they were looking at them like they were something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. I saw Frank, my old business partner from the concrete union, sitting at table 3. Frank is a hard man. He has seen everything. He stood up slowly. He didn't say a word. He just picked up his napkin, threw it on his plate, and walked out. His action triggered a chain reaction. Mrs. Vanderwallet, the socialite Brittany had been desperate to impress, stood up. She looked at Brittany, who was standing there half-naked and exposed, and shook her head. "Disgusting," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. She grabbed her purse and signaled to her husband. They walked out. Then my attorney, Leonard, stood up. He didn't leave. He just crossed his arms and stared at Brandon with a professional, predatory interest. He was taking notes. Brandon looked around the room. He saw his kingdom crumbling. He saw the looks of hatred. He saw the phones still recording, documenting his downfall for the entire world to see. He turned to me. The arrogance was gone. The threat of a lawsuit was gone. In its place was sheer, unadulterated panic. "Dad, wait," he stammered. "It was a joke. It was just a prank. We weren't really going to hurt her. The video, it looks worse than it is." I stepped closer to him. "A prank?" I asked. Breaking a 67-year-old woman's hip is a prank? I didn't mean it like that," he cried. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had just stood on that screen and laughed about breaking his mother's bones. "You know, Brandon," I said, "I spent my whole life building a legacy for you. I built the company. I built the portfolio. I built the reputation. I thought I was building a foundation for my son." I paused. But I realized tonight that I poured the foundation on quicksand. "You are not a builder, son. You are a demolition expert. You just destroyed your own life in less than 3 minutes." I turned to the crowd, to the few people who were still sitting, paralyzed by the drama. "The party is over," I announced. "Go home." But I wasn't done with them yet. The video was just the emotional payoff. Now it was time for the financial execution. I looked toward the back of the room where the hotel manager was waiting with a very important piece of paper. It was time to show them exactly what it costs to betray your family. The silence in the ballroom was broken only by the soft, rhythmic buzzing of the projector cooling fan. The video had ended, but the image of my son and his wife laughing over a tube of industrial glue was still burned into the collective memory of every person in the room. Brandon stood center stage, his face a portrait of ruin. He looked like a man who had just walked out of a burning building only to realize he had forgotten to put on his pants. He was exposed. He was vulnerable. And he was about to find out that rock bottom has a basement. I remained standing. I had the posture of a foreman inspecting a job site that had failed safety regulations. I adjusted my cufflinks. I took a slow, deep breath. The emotional execution was complete. The moral judgment had been passed. Now, it was time for the financial eviction. I raised my hand slightly, a small gesture that would have gone unnoticed in the chaos, but Mr. Henderson was watching. Mr. Henderson, the hotel's general manager, was a man who understood two things very well: discretion and solvency. He had been standing in the shadows of the service entrance for the last 10 minutes, holding a wireless credit card terminal and a very long, very detailed receipt. At my signal, he stepped into the light. He walked onto the dance floor with the solemnity of an undertaker. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the ruined dress. He walked straight up to Brandon. The click of his dress shoes on the parquet floor echoed in the silence. Brandon looked at him, confused. He was still reeling from the video. He didn't have the bandwidth to process a new threat. "Mr. Miller," Mr. Henderson said. His voice was polite, professional, and loud enough to be heard by the first 3 rows of tables. "I apologize for the interruption, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Brandon blinked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Not now, Henderson," he snapped, his voice trembling. "Can't you see we are in the middle of something? Just put it on the tab. I will sign it later." Mr. Henderson didn't move. He didn't retreat. He held up the small black machine. The screen was glowing with a harsh red light. "I'm afraid that is the problem, sir," Henderson said. "We attempted to run the final balance for the evening, as per our contract, which requires full settlement before the cutting of the cake. The transaction was declined." Brandon laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Declined? That is impossible. It is a platinum card. It has no limit. Run it again." "We ran it 3 times, sir," Henderson said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming even more serious. "The bank has flagged the card as invalid. The account associated with it has been frozen by the primary account holder." Brandon froze. The color drained from his face so completely, he looked like a wax figure. He turned his head slowly, painfully, to look at me. I was standing 10 feet away, my arms crossed over my chest. I met his gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked at him with the blank expression of a bank vault door. "Dad?" Brandon whispered. I didn't answer. "Dad!" he shouted, panic rising in his throat. "What did you do? The card isn't working. Tell him to run it again. Tell him it is a mistake." I uncrossed my arms. I took 1 step forward. "It is not a mistake, Brandon," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. It was the voice of a man explaining to a client why their project was being shut down for non-payment. "I canceled the supplementary card 10 minutes ago. I also removed your name from the joint checking account. And the investment portfolio? That has been locked for audit." Brandon looked like he had been punched in the gut. He staggered back a step. You cut me off? Here? Now?" I nodded. "You wanted to be a big man, Brandon. You wanted to run the show. You wanted to treat your mother like an inconvenience and your father like an ATM. Well, congratulations. You are a big man now, and big men pay their own bills." Brandon turned back to Mr. Henderson. He was hyperventilating. How much is it?" he asked. Mr. Henderson looked at the long receipt in his hand. He adjusted his glasses. "Well, sir, for the remaining balance of the banquet, the open bar which has been running significantly over budget, the overtime for the staff, And the security surcharge. That comes to $42,000. Brandon let out a breath. 42,000. It was a lot. But maybe he could scrape it together. Maybe he could beg. However, Henderson continued, looking up from the paper, there are additional charges incurred in the last hour. Additional charges? Brandon squeaked. Yes, sir. The antique French velvet chair that your wife is currently attached to. That is a piece of property valued at $4,000. Since it has been permanently altered with industrial adhesive, you have purchased it. He paused, letting that sink in. And then there is the cleaning fee for the carpet where the centerpiece was thrown. And the damage to the table linens. And of course, the cancellation fee for the honeymoon suite, which was booked under a non-refundable rate, but cancelled by the primary cardholder this evening. Henderson looked at the bottom of the receipt. The total outstanding balance due immediately is $81,450. $81,000. The number hung in the air. It was heavy. It was crushing. It was more money than Brandon had ever earned in a year of pretending to work at my company. Brandon looked at me. His eyes were wide, wet, and pleading. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. All that was left was a terrified child who realized he had broken something he couldn't fix. Dad, please, he begged. I don't have $80,000. You know I don't. I have maybe $2,000 in my personal account. Please, just pay it. We can talk about this later. I will pay you back. I swear. I shook my head. No, Brandon. You won't pay me back. Because you never have. You have lived your entire life on a tab that I was paying. You drove cars I bought. You lived in apartments I rented. You wore suits I tailored. And you thought that gave you the right to look down on the people who made that life possible. I pointed to his mother, who was sitting quietly, watching the son she adored crumble under the weight of his own choices. You tried to break her, Brandon. You tried to break the woman who carried you, who nursed you, who sat by your bed when you were sick. You thought it would be funny to watch her suffer. Well, I don't think this is funny, but I do think it is fair. Brandon turned to Brittany. He was desperate for an ally. Babe, do you have any cards? Do you have anything we can use? Brittany was still standing there, clutching the front of her ruined dress, the chair still stuck to her backside like a wooden tumor. She looked at Brandon with pure hatred. Me, she shrieked. You told me you were rich. You told me your family was loaded. You told me this was all taken care of. It was, Brandon yelled back. He cut me off. He is crazy. He is not crazy, Brittany screamed, realizing her golden ticket had just turned into a foreclosure notice. He is done with you. And if he is done with you, who is going to pay for my dress? Who is going to pay for this chair stuck to my ass? She turned to me. George, please, she said, her voice shifting instantly from rage to a manipulative whine. You can't leave us like this. This is illegal. You have to pay. It is your wedding. I laughed. It was a dry, dusty sound. My wedding? I asked. No, darling. This is your show. I was just the producer, and the producer just pulled the funding. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He stepped closer to Brandon. Sir, if you cannot provide a valid form of payment, I will have to involve the authorities. Theft of services is a felony in this state, especially at this amount. We have police officers in the lobby already, as per the previous incident. Brandon's knees gave way. He slumped against the table. He looked at the floor, defeated. I can't pay, he whispered. I can't pay. I walked over to him. I leaned in close so only he and Brittany could hear the full weight of my verdict. Well, son, I said, you have two options. He looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Option one, I said. You go out to that lobby, you let them put handcuffs on you, and you spend your wedding night in a holding cell explaining to a judge why you thought you could eat a 5-course meal you couldn't afford. I paused. Option two. You go into that kitchen. You take off that tuxedo jacket with the glue in the pocket, you roll up your sleeves, and you start washing dishes. Brandon stared at me. Wash dishes? That is right, I said. At the rate they pay dishwashers, if you work double shifts, you might pay off this debt in about 3 years. I turned to Brittany. And you, my dear, you can help him. Or if you prefer, you can try to sell that dress. I hear there is a niche market for wedding gowns with antique furniture attached to them. But I would hurry. The interest on $80,000 adds up fast. I stood up straight. I felt lighter than I had in years. The burden of supporting them, of making excuses for them, of hoping they would change, was gone. I turned to Patricia. Come on, Patricia, I said. Let's go get a slice of pizza. I suddenly have a craving for something cheap and honest. As we walked out of the ballroom, leaving the chaos behind us, I heard Mr. Henderson speaking into his radio. Security, please escort Mr. Miller to the back office to discuss a payment plan, and bring the dish soap. We are going to be here a while. The sound of the ballroom doors closing behind us was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a check bouncing, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who had to cover it. The financial ruin was just the appetizer. Brandon was leaning against the table, looking like a man who had just gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight champion. But I wasn't done. I had one more heavy hitter in my corner, and he had been waiting patiently by the dessert station for the last 3 hours. I turned my head slightly to the left. Leonard West was already moving. Leonard has been my attorney for 25 years. He is a man who wears 3-piece suits in July and smiles only when he smells blood in the water. He didn't walk. He glided. He moved through the stunned silence of the ballroom with a thick leather briefcase in his hand and a look of absolute, terrifying neutrality on his face. He stopped in front of Brittany. She was still clutching the front of her shredded dress, trying to maintain some semblance of modesty, while the wooden chair hung from her backside like a chaotic tail. She glared at Leonard, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Who are you?" she spat. "Are you another one of George's goons? Get away from me!" Leonard didn't flinch. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked at the chair attached to her. He pulled a crisp, white envelope from his inner jacket pocket. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice smooth as polished granite. "I am Leonard West, legal counsel for George and Patricia Miller, and you are officially served." He extended the envelope. Brittany didn't take it. Her hands were occupied holding her dress together. So, Leonard did what the law allows. He touched the envelope gently to her shoulder, let it drop, and watched it land on the floor next to her feet. "What is this?" Brandon asked, stepping forward. His voice was weak, stripped of all its earlier bluster. "That," Leonard said, turning to face my son, "is a formal complaint filed with the Circuit Court of Cook County. It outlines 2 primary charges against you and your wife." Leonard bent down, picked up the envelope, and opened it himself. He pulled out the documents, the paper crinkling loudly in the quiet room. "Count 1, Leonard read, scanning the page. "Malicious destruction of property. Specifically, an authentic French distinct chair, circa 1920, property of the Drake Hotel, valued at $4,500. Brittany shrieked. "It is just a chair! A stupid old chair!" "It is an antique," Leonard corrected her calmly, "and by applying industrial-grade epoxy to the velvet upholstery, You have rendered it worthless. The hotel management has agreed to press charges, and my client, Mr. Miller, has agreed to provide the video evidence to support their claim. But that is just money, Brandon yelled. I told you, I will pay it back. You can't sue us for a chair. Leonard looked up over his glasses. The look he gave Brandon was the kind of look a scientist gives a bacteria sample. We are not suing you for the chair, Brandon. That is a civil matter for the hotel. We are suing you for count 2. Leonard flipped the page. Attempted aggravated battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress upon a vulnerable adult. The room went deadly cold. Brandon stepped back. Battery? I didn't touch her. You didn't have to, Leonard said. The law is very clear. You and your wife conspired to create a physical trap for Patricia Miller. You were fully aware of her medical condition. You were present when the doctor explained the fragility of her hip replacement. By placing an industrial adhesive on her seat, you created a condition that, had she sat down and attempted to rise, would have resulted in catastrophic physical injury. Leonard paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. The video footage clearly captures your wife stating that she hoped Patricia would break her other hip. That establishes malice. That establishes intent. This wasn't a prank, Brandon. In the eyes of the law, this was a premeditated attempt to cause bodily harm to a disabled person. Brittany started to shake. Real shaking this time. Not the fake trembling she used to get attention. I didn't mean it, she stammered. It was a joke. I just wanted her to be stuck. I didn't want her to die. Leonard ignored her. He turned to me. Mr. Miller, the restraining orders have been filed electronically. As of this moment, neither Brandon nor Brittany is permitted within 500 feet of you, Patricia, or any of your properties. Any of our properties? Brandon asked, his voice barely a whisper. That brings me to the final item, I said, stepping past Leonard to stand directly in front of my son. I reached into my pocket, but instead of a checkbook or a credit card, I pulled out a single heavy brass key. It was the master key to the penthouse on the Gold Coast, the apartment with the marble floors he wanted to rip out, the apartment with the view of the lake, the apartment that was supposed to be their wedding gift. I held it up. The light from the chandeliers caught the metal, making it gleam. Brandon's eyes locked onto it. It was the symbol of the life he thought he was owed. You asked for the money to renovate the penthouse, I said. You said it was dusty. You said it was an old man's club. Brandon reached out a hand, almost instinctively. Dad, please. We have nowhere to go. Our lease on the old place ended yesterday. We moved everything into the penthouse this morning. All our clothes, all our furniture. I closed my fingers around the key. I made a fist. Your lease ended, I agreed. And your occupancy of the penthouse ended 20 minutes ago. Brandon looked confused. What? But our stuff is there. No, I said. Your stuff is currently sitting on the curb of State Street. I hired a moving crew an hour ago. They are very efficient. It might rain tonight, so I suggest you get over there quickly. Brittany gasped. You threw us out? On our wedding night? I didn't throw you out, I said coldly. I simply secured my property. You see, since the deed was never transferred, that apartment still belongs to me. And I don't rent to people who try to cripple my wife. Brandon fell to his knees. It wasn't theatrical this time. His legs just gave out. He looked up at me, tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive spray tan. Dad, stop, please. I am your son. You can't leave us homeless. You can't ruin my life over a mistake. I am your blood. I looked down at him. I looked at the boy I had carried on my shoulders. I looked at the man who had laughed while his wife poured glue on a chair. "Blood?" I asked. I knelt down so I was eye level with him. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "Let me tell you something about blood, Brandon. Blood makes you related. It doesn't make you family. Loyalty makes you family. Respect makes you family." I stood up slowly, dusting off my pants. I have spent 40 years building a fortune. I worked double shifts. I missed birthdays. I broke my back so you wouldn't have to break yours. And I did it all thinking that one day I would hand it to you. I thought I was building a dynasty. I looked at Leonard. "Leonard, do you have the draft of the new will?" Leonard nodded. He pulled a thick document from his briefcase. "Right here, George." I took the document. I held it in front of Brandon's face. "This was the old will," I said. "It left everything to you. The company, the properties, the accounts, roughly $15 million. I ripped the document in half. The sound of the thick paper tearing was louder than the music had been. Brandon flinched. I ripped it again, and again, until it was just confetti on the ballroom floor. "From tomorrow morning," I said, my voice hard as steel, "Leonard is setting up a new trust, the Miller Family Trust." Brandon looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "The beneficiaries," I continued, "will be the Chicago Animal Welfare Society and the Veterans Support Fund." Brandon's jaw dropped. You are giving my money to dogs?" "It is not your money," I roared. "It never was. It is my money. And yes, I would rather leave every single cent to stray dogs than give it to two animals who wear human skin and prey on the weak." I pointed at Brittany, who was still stuck to her chair. "At least a dog is loyal. At least a dog doesn't bite the hand that feeds it. You two, you bit the hand, and now you are surprised that the hand has turned into a fist." I turned to the crowd one last time. "The show is over," I said. "Go home. And if anyone sees my son on the street tonight, don't give him $1. Give him a job application. He is going to need it." I signaled to Patricia. She was waiting by the door, leaning on her cane, looking sad but strong. She knew this had to be done. She knew that sometimes you have to amputate a limb to save the body. I walked over to her. I took her arm. "Ready to go, Mrs. Miller?" I asked. She looked at me and smiled. "Take me home, George." As we walked out, leaving Brandon kneeling in the wreckage of his life and Brittany screaming at her phone, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I had lost a son that night, it is true, but I had saved my dignity. And in the end, that is the only currency that really matters. I stopped at the heavy double doors of the ballroom. I didn't turn around because I missed them. I turned around because I wanted to witness the final law of physics in action. When you remove the structural support from a building made of rot, it doesn't just settle, it collapses. And that is exactly what happened to the great romance of Brandon and Brittany. For months, they had performed this act of being the perfect power couple. They posted photos of their matching watches. They talked about their brand. They called themselves a dynasty. But the moment I closed my checkbook, the moment the illusion of $15 million evaporated, the love in the room vanished so fast it created a vacuum. It started with a whisper, but in the cavernous silence of the empty hall, it sounded like a scream. "You idiot!" Brittany hissed. She was still standing there, the wooden chair hanging from her backside like an anchor dragging her down to hell. "You told me he was a pushover. You told me he would sign anything." Brandon, who was still on his knees, looked up. The desperation in his face had curdled into something uglier. It was pure, unadulterated blame. He scrambled to his feet, wiping the tears and snot from his face with the sleeve of his expensive tuxedo. "Me?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "This was your idea. I wanted to just ask for the money. But no, you had to be cruel. You had to humiliate her. You said it would be funny." He took a step toward her, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "You cost me everything!" Brandon screamed. $15 million, Brittany, the company, the penthouse, my entire life. It is all gone because you couldn't just keep your mouth shut and your glue in the tube." Brittany's eyes went wide. The shock of being held accountable was too much for her narcissism to handle. She took a step back, the chair legs scraping loudly against the parquet floor. "Don't you dare blame me, you loser!" she shrieked. She pointed a manicured finger at his chest. "You are a fraud, Brandon. You told me you were the CEO. You told me you ran the business. But you are nothing. You are just a daddy's boy with an allowance." She laughed, a manic, hysterical sound that bounced off the walls. "I married a dishwasher," she yelled. "I am stuck to a chair, wearing a ruined dress, married to a man who can't even pay for the cake." That was the breaking point. Brandon, the man who had never fought for anything in his life, decided to fight the woman he had sworn to love 10 minutes ago. He lunged at her. "You are a gold digger," he roared. "You are nothing but trash wrapped in silk." He grabbed her by the shoulders. I don't think he intended to hit her, but he shook her. And because she was attached to a 40-pound piece of furniture, the physics were all wrong. Brittany lost her balance. She stumbled backward. "Get off me!" she screamed. She swung her hand. It wasn't a slap. It was a clawing, desperate strike. Her nails raked across Brandon's cheek, leaving 3 bright red lines that immediately began to well up with blood. Brandon cried out in pain and shock. He shoved her away. Brittany fell. She didn't fall gracefully. The chair hit the ground first, twisting her body at an awkward angle. She crashed into the table behind her, the table that held the wedding cake. The 5-tier tower of vanilla and raspberry cream, the cake that had cost more than my first car, wobbled for a second. And then gravity took over. It toppled. It crashed down on top of them. White frosting exploded like a bomb. Sponge cake and raspberry filling splattered across Brittany's ruined dress, covering the chair, covering her hair. Brandon slipped in the mess, falling hard onto his back right next to her. For a moment, they just lay there. 2 people who thought they were royalty, now rolling around in a mixture of sugar, cream, and their own hatred. They were wrestling, slipping, screaming insults at each other that would make a sailor blush. Brandon was trying to push the cake off his tuxedo. Brittany was trying to kick him, her legs tangling in the layers of her dress and the legs of the chair. It was grotesque. It was pathetic. And it was the truest thing they had ever done together. I saw movement in the corner of my eye. The police officers, the ones Mr. Henderson had called earlier, were finally moving in. They walked onto the dance floor with the weary resignation of men who have seen too many domestic disputes on Saturday nights. They didn't run. They didn't draw their weapons. They just walked over to the pile of cake and broken dreams. "All right, break it up," one of the officers shouted. He reached down and grabbed Brandon by the collar, hauling him up. Brandon was covered in frosting, his face bleeding, his eyes wild. "She assaulted me!" Brandon yelled, pointing at his wife. "Look at my face! Arrest her! Arrest!" The other officer looked at Brittany. She was trying to stand up, but the chair made it impossible to get traction on the slippery floor. She looked like a beetle stuck on its back. "Help me!" she screamed at the cop. "He attacked me! He is crazy!" The officer sighed. He reached down and helped her up. He looked at the chair attached to her rear end. He looked at the glue. He shook his head. "Ma'am, you are going to have to come with us," the officer said. "I can't," she wailed. "I am stuck to the furniture." "We have a saw in the van," the officer said dryly. We will deal with that at the station. Turn around. He pulled her hands behind her back. He had to maneuver around the chair to get the handcuffs on. It was an awkward, humiliating dance. Brandon was already cuffed. He was sobbing now. The anger had drained away, leaving only the terrified realization of what was happening. "Dad!" he screamed, looking toward the door. "Dad, don't let them take me!" I stood there for one last second. I looked at the son I had raised, covered in cake, handcuffed, being read his rights for disorderly conduct and public intoxication. I looked at the daughter-in-law I had tried to welcome, now a prisoner of her own malice. I felt Patricia squeeze my arm. "Let's go, George," she whispered. I turned my back on the stage. I pushed open the double doors. The cool night air of Chicago hit my face. It smelled of rain and exhaust, but to me, it smelled like freedom. I didn't look back as the flashing blue lights of the police cruisers painted the walls of the ballroom. I didn't look back as they dragged my legacy out in handcuffs. I just walked Patricia to the car, opened the door for her, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who my family was. The walk from the ballroom to the valet stand felt like walking out of a funeral and into a birth. Behind us, the noise of the hotel lobby was a chaotic mix of police radios, shocked whispers, and the frantic clicking of high heels on marble as guests rushed to get their cars and escape the scandal. But I didn't care about any of that. My world had narrowed down to the woman walking beside me. Patricia moved differently now. She was still leaning on her cane, yes, but the heaviness was gone. The hunch in her shoulders, the one that came from years of trying to make herself smaller so Brittany wouldn't feel threatened, had vanished. She walked with the rhythm of a survivor. We stepped out into the cool Chicago night. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, but after the stifling, perfume-choked air of the reception, it was the freshest thing I had ever smelled. The valet, a young kid who had no idea that the world inside had just burned down, jogged up with our car. It was my old Lincoln town car. Brittany had begged me to sell it. She said it was an old man's car. She wanted us to arrive in a rented Bentley for the photos. I refused. And looking at that solid, heavy steel beast now, I knew I had made the right choice. It was like me. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't trendy. But it was built to survive a crash. I helped Patricia into the passenger seat. I tucked her dress in so it wouldn't get caught in the door. I walked around, got behind the wheel, and shut the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was final. It sealed us inside a bubble of silence. I didn't start the engine immediately. I just sat there, gripping the leather steering wheel, waiting. I was waiting for the tears. I was waiting for Patricia to break down, to mourn the son we had just left in handcuffs. I was ready to comfort her. I was ready to be strong. But the tears didn't come. Instead, I heard the soft snap of a purse clasp opening. I looked over. Patricia was reaching into her small beaded handbag. Her hand was steady. She pulled out a long black velvet box. I knew that box. It contained a pair of diamond drop earrings. They were vintage. They were flawless. They were the gift Patricia had planned to give Brittany during the speeches. She had saved for 2 years to buy them. She wanted Brittany to have something blue and something old. Patricia held the box in her lap. She didn't open it. She just ran her thumb over the velvet. She looked at it with a strange expression. It wasn't sadness. It was the look of someone clearing out a closet, deciding what to keep and what to throw away. "George," she said softly. "Yes, honey?" She took a deep breath. "I think I will keep these," she said. She didn't sound angry. She sounded practical. "I think they will look better on me, don't you? Or maybe we can sell them. I have always wanted a greenhouse in the backyard." I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. A real smile. A greenhouse sounds perfect, I said. She put the box back into her purse and snapped it shut. That click was louder than the police sirens fading in the distance. It was the sound of a door closing on 30 years of ungratefulness. It was the sound of my wife taking her power back. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were dry and clear, reflecting the streetlights. "You were right, George," she said. Her voice was strong. "You were right about everything. I kept hoping that if I just loved them enough, if I just gave them enough, they would change. I thought love was about enduring pain." She reached out and covered my hand with hers. "But pain isn't love," she whispered. "It is just pain. And I am done hurting." I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the seats. "So," I asked, shifting the car into gear. "Where to, the house?" Patricia looked out the window at the city skyline. She looked at the towering buildings where we had built our business. She looked at the streets where we had raised our son. And then she shook her head. "No," she said. "Not the house. It is too quiet there." She looked back at me, and for the first time in years, I saw the sparkle in her eyes that had made me fall in love with her 4 decades ago. "Do you remember that trip we talked about?" she asked. "The one we canceled because Brandon needed money for his startup? And then the one we canceled because Brittany needed the deposit for the wedding venue?" "Italy," I said. "Tuscany." "Yes," she said. "Tuscany. Do we still have our passports in the glove compartment?" I nodded. "I always kept them there, just in case." "Then drive to O'Hare, George," she said. "Let's go to Italy. Tonight. I want to drink wine on a patio where no one knows my name. I want to eat bread without anyone telling me I am too fat. I want to live." I didn't argue. I didn't ask about luggage. We could buy clothes when we got there. We had the credit cards. We had the freedom. And most importantly, we had each other. I pulled away from the curb. I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The Drake Hotel stood like a glowing fortress against the night sky. Inside, I knew there was chaos. I knew there were lawyers shouting, managers tallying bills, and a son realizing that his ATM had finally run out of cash. But as I accelerated onto Lakeshore Drive, merging into the stream of taillights heading away from the city, the hotel shrank in the mirror until it was just a speck of light. And then, it was gone. We drove in silence, but it wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. The road ahead was dark, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what was coming. We had cut the dead weight. We had survived the storm. I squeezed Patricia's hand. "Italy it is," I said. As the city lights faded behind us, replaced by the open highway, I realized that this wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of the only chapter that really mattered. That is my story. It wasn't the wedding night we planned, but it was the one we needed. I learned that you cannot buy loyalty, and you cannot teach respect to those who refuse to learn. But you can save yourself. And sometimes, the best way to win a war is to simply leave the battlefield and never look back. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have paid the bill to save face, or would you have let them wash dishes? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice served cold and sticky, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us share more stories like this one. Until next time, remember, respect is earned, not inherited. Safe travels, everyone. We often cling to toxic relationships simply because they share our last name. We mistake endurance for love, believing that if we just tolerate the disrespect long enough, they will eventually change. But tonight taught me that you cannot teach gratitude to those who feel entitled to your existence. A child may have your eyes, but that doesn't mean they have your heart. Real family protects you. They don't set traps for you. Walking away wasn't an act of abandonment. It was an act of self-preservation. Remember, your dignity is the one asset you must never liquidate for anyone. If you believe that parents owe their children love, but children owe their parents respect, hit that like button and subscribe to see who gets justice next.